This is something that I think people lose sight of, that course standards were actually sold to the country by focusing on STEM. The assertion was from the creators, or from the publicity hounds for the creators, was that course standards were going to enable significantly improved outcomes in the STEM pathway by improving preparation for STEM. Well, later on, we'll get down to the actual data, and I'll leave the conclusions to you. But it's worth noting the quote from the president, where he explains that that the important thing that he did when he pushed course standard was exactly his belief that it was going to improve the STEM pathway. And of course, that was the apple, and then, here's the stick. Race to the top. Now, I'm going to go a little more deeply into race to the top than the people did this morning, but not much because I don't have any time, and you can count yourselves lucky. So this is from a recommendation of a panel the president put together to evaluate best steps to improve STEM. And here's what their basic conclusion was. Their conclusion was basically, hey, look, what they're doing in core standards is what is our only chance for improving STEM. So let's make race to the top funds dependent on STEM participation. On core standards participation. And now we get to the meat of it. Who are these core standards really for? Now I said last time in my last talk, I said, well. The definition of college readiness is having completed a course in Algebra 2. You might like to know, have some proof of that, because from the perspective of anybody who's involved in a STEM area, Algebra 2 isn't sufficient, period. So the person one of the three authors, the actual three lead writers of core standards, was Jason Zimba, and here he is talking in front of the State Department of Education in, that's nice. He was talking. Let's try again, because we had this working a minute ago. So let's see if it works. Okay.
It leaves us with all the thorny problems of exactly what that means. But we have agreement to the extent that it's a fuzzy definition that the minimally college-ready student is a student who's passed Algebra 2.
Okay, there you have it. Testimony in front of the Massachusetts Board of Education by Jason Zimba, who now denies it. He denies that he ever said it. All right. So here's another character we've already dealt with. And she was on the board at that time, and she asked Jason for clarification, and I'm going to let play out the resulting exchange. Okay, we're going to go through this business again.
The definition of college readiness, I think it's a fair critique that it's a minimal definition of college readiness.
For some colleges.
Well, for the colleges most kids go to, but not that most parents probably aspire.
Okay, I've stopped that at that point for you to think about this. For the colleges most kids go to, but most parents probably don't aspire to.
Right.
It's not for STEM, it's not for
That's
international.
true. It's not only not for STEM, it's also not for selective colleges that, for example, at UC Berkeley, even whether you're going to be an engineer or not, you better have pre-calculus to get
But
at
we have
UC
to do
Berkeley,
with our
right?
engineering college.
And again, think about that. Gee, it's not for UC Berkeley. What is it for? Of course, we're not done.
That's true. I think the third pathway goes a lot towards that, but your issue is really broader than that.
Oh, yes.
So I just wanted to make sure that we got that
I'm
out.
not just thinking of selective colleges. There's a much broader question here.
That's right. It's both, I think, in the sense of being clear about what this college readiness does and doesn't get you, and that's the big subject.
But not to call something college ready when it only applies to a certain kind of college and a certain lower level of mathematical expertise that won't buy you far on the international market in most major disciplines of technology, economics, business, and so on.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I couldn't have said it better myself. Well, as I say, two things to notice, both of which I somehow stopped to show you. But one I didn't mention, and that was the first of these red dots here, that actually, at a crucial point in there, when Zimba had to admit that it wasn't for schools that, engineering schools or other, it wasn't for STEM pathways, he said, but the third pathway goes a long ways toward fixing this. The trouble is, the third pathway does not exist in the final version. It sort of existed as what we call stubs, that is, little notes that something should be in there. It sort of existed in the March version, but it was gone in the final version. And so there is no third pathway. And the only thing that it is prepared to do in core standards is Algebra 2. And again, let me remind you again what he said here, because that's just so beautiful. So this is for anyone that's interested. These are the stubs that were in the March version. And they're pretty good stubs. They give you a broad picture of a pretty reasonable course in calculus. So if they were going to get to that, then I wouldn't have had any objections to core standards, because I don't object to the idea of national standards. What I object to is the idea of standards that are going to deprive the brightest students in the country of much of a chance of getting into something serious. So at any rate, what's going on? I mean, at this stage, somebody should ask, what's going on? What is underlying all of this? Mathematically speaking, you could just look at the California standards or the Massachusetts standards or the Indiana standards. You've got perfectly good, well-tested models for the upper-level courses, trig, pre-calculus, and calc. And it would be 5 minutes to transfer those standards over to core standards, but they didn't do it. And the reason they didn't do it was based on a certain philosophy that underlies the development of core standards. Somewhere the word social justice appears. So I have to put this in. It seems the government bought a pig in a poke. And the states as well, of course. But the real cost of this pig will probably be enormous. And unfortunately, in dollars, I expect that we're probably too far along this curve to stop it. But what's tragic and what really gets me is in the huge loss of human capital that's going to result. So now let's look a little bit at data. I have to do that. So what are the odds of determining of obtaining a 4-year college degree against the highest mathematics course completed in high school. Incidentally, the highest math course completed in high school, the correlation between that and a college degree is the single greatest determiner of college degree among all properties you normally look at. If you look at economic status, if you look at ethnic, any of these, this has the strongest correlation with obtaining a college degree. And so here it is, and I've outlined it over here. Sorry, I'm going to have to leave the microphone. And so over there where I colored it in, that's the probability of getting a degree if your highest level, calculus 83.3%, pre-calculus 74.6%, trig 60%. Oh, wait a second, what's going on here? Algebra 2, 39%. Not quite 40% of the kids who stopped with Algebra 2 are ever going to obtain a college degree. And we'll deal with STEM degree later. So, but everybody took this huge jump between 16.7% for geometry. Ah, wow. Of course, it has to be turned on.
Push the button.
Hey, look at that. Okay, so look at geometry here at 16.7. Look at algebra, 7%. And there's this big jump from 16.7 to 39.3, but it's not over 50%. I would think that anything that gets college ready has to have a 50% chance of giving you a degree. Anyway, that's the data that was used by the authors to justify Algebra 2. It's this data, is this table. And I'm going to ignore the distribution except to say that we look at the advanced courses, the trig, the calculus, and there's a huge difference in the likelihood that a school will have calculus or trig versus their socioeconomic status. So look, if you no longer require them in any reasonable sense, as core standards doesn't, then in the schools that can least afford to have, least afford the teachers, what's going to happen is these numbers right in here are the numbers that are going to drop. The numbers up here are because these wealthy parents sort of subsidize the keeping in a teacher capable of teaching calculus, and they're not likely to drop near as much as these here. So what you're going to see with core standards, once it's implemented, is what I would call what's first of all is going to be that you're going to lose out the kids in the lower socioeconomic quintiles are going to have far less possibility of taking a more advanced course and improving their odds than are the kids coming from more wealthy areas. So what you're going to see is a classic regression to the mean. And now let's look at a very simple thing. Let's look at since STEM was what originally sold core standards, let's look at the STEM intending students and what their history is. So what are the odds of achieving an actual degree in STEM if a student has to start with college algebra? Even pre-calculus, for that matter, the same data there, and here it is. So what's that number what's that look like? 2.1 with an exclamation point. 2.1% chance of obtaining a STEM degree, even though you entered college intending to major in STEM, if you have to take pre-algebra, pre-calculus or trig as your first college level course. 2%. So the number of people who can finish a STEM degree, or will finish, is just going to drop like a stone. Now, I don't know, I think that's serious. So how are we doing on time? 10 minutes. Gee, I went too fast. So, okay, I'll slow down. So let's see here. I would suggest that Zimba's statements at the March 2010 meeting tell people very clearly what core standards are really about when he expands on the stated objective of these standards, preparing students for entry into the workforce and college readiness. So now Zimba has filled in what college readiness means and the real implications of college readiness according to core standards. And this is real data I'm talking about here. All this data comes from the National Center for Education Statistics, which is a subsidiary of IES, Institute for Educational Science. Right, I was on the board for that, I should know it. And they're a sub-agency within the U.S. Department of Education. So this is the most reliable statistics we have. So in summary, and looking at the way students' school taking works, your top 30% are going to go to a four-year school if they can, and they're going to, they're going to have the highest probability of finishing a degree, and the reality is that you're not going to get much in the way of any STEM students coming from less than the top 30%, like it or not. Core standards are simply not for the top 30%. They ignore the top 30%. They're focused in on the what I'll call average students. And so the students from the 20th to the 70th percentile in a high school class. These are the ones that core standards in any sense are for. And so from my perspective, the main question is what will happen with the academically talented student under Core Plus? And now again, for standard statistical analysis, the expectation is that they will regress toward the mean, and we will lose a significant portion of them to mediocrity. So that's what we're looking at. And now, since I've got some time, much to my surprise, okay, yeah, I'll give you as much time as I can, Seb, yes. I'm going to say a word about this, and then I'm going to quit. This is a very blunt statement up there, the title, right? Using the leverage of race to the top funds, well, don't forget, that was $4.3 billion that has already been spent. And it was, as somebody earlier mentioned, basically at a time when all the states were desperate for any kind of funding that they could get. So the inducement of $4.3 billion was just huge. And that was the biggest reason why this kind of ridiculous buy-in occurred. Now, this is the next thing here is a bit technical, and I won't. Basically, it's this sentence here, the one in blue. This is a requirement in the request for proposals for the first race to the top funds. The requirement is that development of consortiums final high school summative assessments and to implement policies that exempt from remedial courses and place into credit-bearing college courses students who meet the consortium-adopted achievement standard. What is that standard? Come on, from the audience. Right, Algebra 2. And we know now what the expectations look like for a student whose highest high school course is Algebra 2. And yet, what we're going to do with those students is we're going to find a button. There, that's the button. Okay. Exempt from remedial courses and place into credit-bearing college courses students whose highest math course in high school was Algebra 2. And that's what we're talking about here. Okay, in order to apply for the Race to the Top money, every institution of higher education, that is public, and that means state, had to provide a letter of intent that commits the IHE to participate in the consortium and follow the directive on the preceding slide. So they even have an enforcement. And now we're not talking about non-selective colleges or community colleges anymore. We're talking about your four-year institutions. We're not talking about Stanford, mind you, because we're not a public institution. But we are talking about University of Indiana, Purdue, and Michigan, Michigan State, and so on. And so what do you think is going to happen? Well, your first-year courses at these public four-year universities will have to be lowered in content. They'll have to cover the content that will be missing for too many of these students for the simple reason that nobody at these schools likes 90% failure rates. You tend, if you're a beginning instructor, you tend to get fired if you have a 90% failure rate in your course. So what has to happen is that these first-year courses have to go down in level to being roughly at the level of something we would call intermediate algebra or the very beginnings of pre-calculus. And so we're going to have to add another year in there of mathematics, and make calculus that much further from freshman year. Incidentally, we regard at Stanford calculus as remedial. Our largest single class at Stanford is the freshman class in advanced calculus. Over 2/3 of the students, freshman students at Stanford, have taken at least 1/4 of advanced calculus by the end of their freshman year. And the thing isn't any different at Harvard or the other elite schools. So I was talking at the beginning about the difference in level between the elites and the publics and how that was increasing. This is the first point where you really see it. Okay, and I'll leave this slide up for a minute. In effect, what Core Standards really does for you is seed control of the higher education courses in ELA and mathematics to K through 12 and the education schools. But Sandy and I can't believe that this was not the intent from the beginning.